So we're going to be talking about text today. Does anybody have any questions on anything else so far that we've talked about? Any troubles or?
I'm just trying to set up I open up a justification, and none of my layers are there.
Well, so if you open up a file that you didn't create, then you're not starting with your template file, right? So your layers wouldn't be in there.
Is there a way to do that?
There is a way. So did you create a bunch of more than
I just did the doors and windows.
Okay. There is a way. Yes. Let's that's a good topic. So the idea with a template file, so this has to do with a template file, right? The idea with a template file is that when you start a brand new project, that all your layers and settings, etc., are in there, right? So what if you have a file that you're working in that you didn't start with your template file, but you want to be able to migrate those settings from the template file into the current file so you can use all of those settings that you have, right? There is a way that you can do it, and let me just see if I have something I can bring in here. So hopefully I've created some layers in this one. So let's see. Well, let's just create a few here. So layer properties, and I'll create several new layers. Okay. So those are our brand new layers. I'm going to close out this AIA layers file and save it. But what essentially you would do is while you're in the file that you want to migrate the settings into, you're going to do an insert. And you're going to insert your template file into the model space of the file you're in. And by doing that, there's really nothing to insert, like there's no geometry really. And so by doing that, you're just migrating settings. So you're inserting settings from the file that you're inserting. So I'm going to, within this file, type I for insert, enter. And then I'm going to browse to wherever the file is that I want to migrate into this current file. So I'm going to click on Browse. Mine happens to be on the desktop, and it's AIA layers, right? Yours would be called template file or whatever, right? And then I would click Open, OK, and at the command line it says Insert, specify an insertion point. So I'm just going to click anywhere in model space. So by clicking, that essentially inserted that file into this file, right? So it's not like I have a file open in a file. The settings have just been migrated over. Well, it will append your layers, right? So I have these layers that were already in there, and then in addition to that, it generated the rest of them. Yeah, and it will do that with everything. So dimensions and blocks and whatever you have in your template file. So.
And all you did was just type in insert?
Yep. Let me do it one more time. I for insert, enter. And I went and I browsed for that template file. And I went and found it wherever it was, saved. And I clicked on it and I hit open. OK. And I'm going to click to place it. And that's it. Nothing visually really happens, right? I don't see anything say, your file has been inserted and all these things have been brought in. It just kind of happens. So that's a really good question, and it's kind of the eternal problem, right? So you go somewhere, you start a file, and you're like, hey, I didn't start with my template, so what good is it? This is how you can use it. Good question. All right. So let's talk about text. Now, and I keep saying this because we're kind of in the midst of revising a lot of things in the program, but AutoCAD is kind of next on the list for revisions as far as the class booklet goes, right? We're going to update it and do a bunch of things. And this section, the text section, is a biggie. So in the booklet, in the course booklet that we have, which is very helpful, right? There are really a couple of sections that have pretty big changes in them that need to be updated, and text is one of them. So let me just show you. We're going to come down here to text in the course manual. So layers and drawing and all that good stuff has somewhat stayed the same. How to draw site plans and all that good stuff. Printing from model space is great. Drawing site plans with curves, all really great. Stays fairly similar to the way we're learning it, all right? But text styles is a huge departure from this version of AutoCAD the book was generated off of. So this booklet was generated off of the idea that we're going to sort of manually insert text and manually figure out the size of text, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to use AutoCAD's new automatic way of doing it, which is called Annotative. So we're going to use annotative text instead of the regular old manual text styles, okay? So let me show you what that means. Let me give you a visual of that and just say that if you're using the book, which I think is great, it's still got a lot of good information in it, but you know, and the way the book is doing it, if you want to do it that way, it's great. Just it's really outdated, so it's more work, I feel like. But let me show you what the way the book is doing it. Let's talk about that. All right, so I'm just going to create a little bit of text here. So we're not doing anything quite new just yet. I'm just going to show you kind of how the system is going to work in AutoCAD with regard to text. Okay, so I'm going to come up here to annotate, and on the annotate tab in the ribbon, this is where all of our annotation settings are. So things like text and dimensions and leaders and tables, right? Annotation type settings and things are going to be located under the Annotate tab. And annotation, it does exactly what it sounds like. It annotates construction drawings. And that means it describes elements in construction drawings, right? So you'll get things like descriptive dimensions. So a piece of annotation that's a dimension describes the length of objects. Or leaders, you can point to things and describe what they are. Or descriptive text, right? So room names or different type of notes that describe construction documents, those are all different types of annotation, okay? So here is our kind of text tool palette within the Annotate tab here. And I'm just going to create a little piece of text. You don't need to quite follow along here, but I'm going to create a new piece of text. We'll call this City Blueprint. And I'm not going to make it annotative just yet because I want to show you kind of the old system so that you can more appreciate the new system. All right, I'm going to apply that, set it current. All right, so I'm going to create a piece of text and I'm going to make it 1/4 of an inch tall. Okay, and I'm going to, we'll type it out, 1/4 of an inch tall text. And I'm going to hit enter again, and that little piece of text is going to generate. Okay, so, oh, what do I have here? Oh, it did insert the floor plan. Sorry, that's not going to happen with you guys because you don't have anything in your template file. So, the idea behind a template file is it's blank, right? There's no drawing in it. So when you insert it, nothing comes in. That was a different type of file. So here's 1/4 of an inch tall text, okay? And then I'm going to I need to look at something real quick, and then we're going to do a little bit more text. But let me just go, I have to look in the course manual here real quick. Okay, let's see. And, oop. Okay, so, okay, I'm going to create another piece of text, and I'm going to type in text and justify bottom left, and I'm going to create this text at 1 foot tall, 12 inches, okay, and did I do 12 inches? Oh yes, I did. Okay. I'm hoping that when I hit enter it'll jump up size. Yes, all right. So I have these two pieces of text, okay? And one is 1/4 of an inch tall and one is 12 inches tall. And obviously this one is way larger than that one, okay? So let me show you what would happen if I went to print these two pieces of text. This is just, bear with me here for a second. And we're going to learn how to use this interface called Paperspace pretty quick here, but for now we don't quite know how to use it. But I'm going to scale this text at 1/4 of an inch is equal to 1 foot to print it out, okay? All right. So I've just taken this viewport and I've scaled it to 1/4 of an inch is equal to 1 foot. And what you can see happening here is that if I measure these two pieces of text while they're scaled, the 1/4 of an inch text actually ends up being, it's not even reading on my measurement down here because it's not within the precision that I have set, okay? So it's really tiny. Well, maybe it's not so tiny. We'll take it down to 128. There we go. Let's measure it again. Okay. So that text, oh, no, see, it's still small. So that text is actually going to be smaller than the precision I have set, which was 1/128th of an inch, all right? Let's make it even smaller, 1/256, and see if I can get a measurement. Do a distance here, see if I can just measure the height there. Turn on my ortho. Ooh, I almost got a measurement. There we go. 1/256, right? So that is a tiny, tiny little piece of text. If I type it in, add a 1/4 of an inch in model space, okay? Now this piece of text that was 12 inches, if I measure this in paper space as it's supposed to be scaled, let's get an even increment there. I'm not getting an even increment. 8:30 seconds. Should be pretty close. Well, now I have to take my precision down. Sorry, guys. Going back and forth here. Now the precision is too much. It's measuring too accurately in this case. But if I measure this text now here, see if we can get it to snap, it's going to be about a 1/4 of an inch, okay? So if I actually draw text in model space, that is what I think it needs to be printed at, right? So a 1/4 of an inch, I want text on my piece of paper to print at a 1/4 of an inch tall, and I make it a 1/4 of an inch tall in model space. When I scale the drawing, it scales it down so it's really, 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 really tiny, all right? And if I bump up the size of my text so that it's a certain increment larger than what it needs to be, then it's the right size when it prints, okay? This is a really confusing topic, all right? Essentially what's happening here is that when you scale drawings in AutoCAD, and I talked about this a little bit, AutoCAD uses a zoom factor to scale, right? So if you have a building that is 400 feet by 400 feet, it physically won't fit on a piece of paper when you print it, right? So you have to scale it. What that means is you have to say it's going to be 1/8 of an inch is equal to a foot, which means that it's going to scale it down, zooming in 96 times. 1/8 of an inch scale factor is 96. It's going to zoom it in 96 times so that you can view it so that that scale is the right size. Blank stares, right? You don't really have to understand it other than just understanding the idea behind it. We're taking a really large object and we're zooming it in so that it appears tiny, right? So it's a measurable tiny. And so we have to do the same thing with our text. So if our text is a 1/4 of an inch tall and then we zoom in 96 times, it's going to be 1/256 inches tall, right? Just the itty-bittiest little increment. So when we're using model space and we're putting text in model space, we have to scale the text up so that when it zooms in, right, to make it tiny, it's appropriately the right size. Does that idea somewhat make a little bit of sense? Okay, so that's why when I made this text a 1/4 of an inch tall, it was way too tiny. And when I scaled it, it shrunk, right? It didn't shrink, but it appeared as if it shrunk. And that's why this text that was 12 inches tall, when I zoomed in and I scaled, it came out to be a 1/4 of an inch tall, which is what it should have been, okay? So this is sort of the way that the system in AutoCAD used to function for us. So whenever we were creating drawings, there's this lovely chart that is one of the last pages in our booklet where you look down here and it says, oh, 1/8 of an inch tall text, right? So if I want my text to print at 1/8 of an inch tall and I want to scale at 1/8 of an inch, that text has to be a foot tall in model space in order for it to print and read and measure at 1/8 of an inch tall, okay? So we essentially, with all of our text and all of our drawings, we had to think of it in terms of we have to scale it up so that then it scales back down and it prints the right size, okay? Which is a gigantic pain in the neck, right? And if somebody ever asks you to change the scale of your drawings, you're like, try and convince them with everything you have. No, we don't need to change the scale of the drawings, right? Because we know we have to change the scale of all the text, and that's a pain in the neck too. Sky's taken Revit, or are you taking it right now? You took it last semester. So Revit does this automatically as well, right? When you have annotation in Revit and you change scales, you notice it jumps. It gets bigger or smaller depending on how you're changing your scale. Revit's doing the same thing that AutoCAD is doing, but it's doing it automatically, right? And that's kind of the magic in Revit. It scales that text automatically to be the right size, which is really great. So this is the way that the book tells you how to go about creating text. It says, hey, if you want your text to print in 1/4 of an inch tall at 1/4 of an inch scale, then it has to be drawn at 1 foot. Okay, if you want your text to be 1/4 of an inch tall at 1 inch is equal to 20 feet, it needs to be 5 feet tall, so that when you zoom in by a factor of 240, that text will remain big enough to be the right size. Okay. What's that?
Will the text overpower your model space?
Yeah, it gets really big.
Big letter.
Yeah.
Line.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. But honestly, a lot of times, if you keep your scale appropriate, it doesn't get too bad, right? So something that's going to be a scale of 1 to 20 will be something gigantic like an entire site plan. So the site plan is going to be really big, and you're going to scale it down. And so the text will end up being pretty large, but in comparison to the gigantic site plan, it won't be too bad. So it somewhat works out most of the time. All right, so I guess my whole reasoning behind showing you this is that AutoCAD now will do this automatically for you. And it will do it automatically for you using annotative text. So we no longer have to sort of calculate how big our text needs to be in order for it to scale down and be the right size. We're just going to let AutoCAD do the work. Okay, so we're going to set up text styles that are annotative text styles, and we're going to tell AutoCAD, hey, with this annotative text style, we want the text always to read when it prints at 1/8 of an inch tall, and you're going to figure out how big it needs to be in model space for that to happen, all right? So within model space, you'll still see your text jump up and down, but it will be an automatic process as opposed to you having to manually go in and figure it out, okay? Which was a gigantic jump in technology for AutoCAD, right? This change only happened several years ago, so it's kind of a big deal, right? All right, so let's talk about annotative text and how we're going to use that. I am going to start a brand new drawing, and I'm going to do that because Jeff's drawings are very troublesome sometimes. I should accuse him of booby trapping them so that annotative text won't work in them, because I don't think he likes it very much. He likes to do things the old way. So I'm going to start a brand new drawing here, and I'm going to set my units, and we'll make them architectural, and we'll keep our precision to 1/32. This looks good. And I'm just going to draw something in here, and we'll create a couple of layers. So, we've got a few in here. Good, good. I'm going to click on my wall layer, and I'm going to click on my line, and we'll make this 15 foot long. And we'll just make it 20 foot tall. Looks good. And that'll be 30 foot, and we'll just kind of make it this odd angular shape like that. All right, so I have something in here at least to kind of give me a little bit of scale, right? So when I forget, somebody remember that I made this 20 feet tall. All right, so let's talk about creating some text. Text is going to be one of those things where you're going to want to create some text styles, and you're going to want to create them in your template so that when you start a brand new project, you already have them inherently created, and it's just quicker to get going, right? You're probably already finding that out. Using your template, you don't have to create your layers, right? You have some things already set up in there. So adding your text styles to your template will be very helpful. So I'm going to talk about how to generate a text style, and then we're going to talk about 2 different ways of actually creating text in AutoCAD. We have multi-line text here. We have our singular line text commands here. And down here we have a little pop-out menu, a fly-out menu. And when I click on this little arrow right here, I get the text style editor, essentially. And this is where you're going to generate a new text style. And a text style is going to be taking a font and a height of text and making it annotative, and then customizing things like, do you want it to be upside down or backwards, have an italicized italics associated with it, I guess. Do you want it italics? And what kind of width factor do you want associated with it? So when I say a text style, you're just essentially defining the aesthetics of the text and saying how tall you want it to be, okay? So I'm going to change my text. I'm actually going to create a text style. And the first thing I'm going to do is click on New here. So New, and we'll call this City Blueprint. And I'm going to maybe put the height out in front of it. Let's make this 1/8 of an inch tall. So 1/8 of an inch tall City Blueprint. And I'm going to hit OK. Oh, of course. Is that right? The tiny little text, I'm squinting to see 1/8. City Blueprint. So sometimes this is one of those things when you're brand new, you get into an office and you're like, why did they spell out 1/8 or 1/4 or half, right? You can't use little slash mark to actually make the number. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK there, and I'm going to edit how my text style looks. So I want my font to be City Blueprint. Okay, and we want it to be a regular font. Sometimes you get other options here like bold or whatever, right? I'm going to check Annotative. If I don't check Annotative, then my text is going to have to be manually sized in order for it to scale appropriately. Okay, so this is really the departure from what the book talks about. So we make sure it's annotative, and we're going to type in the printed height we want our text to be, right? We don't care if in model space it ends up being 18 feet tall, but when it prints, we want it to be 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to type in 1/8 of an inch. And my width factor, I'm going to make this is just an aesthetic item. I'm going to make this 0.75 just to give it a little bit of something, right? And that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to click on Set Current. Okay, and I'm going to close that out. All right, so I've just created one text style. I'm going to create another text style while we're at it. I'm going to click on my little flyout again, and I could have done this all in the same motion, right? But I decided to go back in. I'm going to click on New, and let's do 1/4. I always forget. And we'll do Calibri, 1/4 inch Calibri. So,
because mine will say 1/8, but it says my like 0.1250. Does that also say 1? Does that also
1/8? Your units might be set to decimal.
Decimal.
Yes. Yep. Check that. So here, if it's showing up in decimal like 0.125, it might your units might not be set to architectural. All right, so I've got 1/4 inch Calibri. There's my font and regular style and annotative, of course, and the paper text height will be 1/4 of an inch. And my width factor will make that 0, so it's just the normal width factor. Let's not give it an oblique angle, or width factor of 1, I guess I should say. And we'll apply. Okay, so I'm going to hit close now. What you're going to notice is that those styles that you generate, they pop up in this drop-down menu here. This is called the gallery view of your text styles. So now I have kind of a out-of-the-box standard text style that was there when AutoCAD opened. I've got my 1/8, I've got my 1/4, and I have another standard one that was there when AutoCAD opened. Okay, so there are a couple that just are inherent in AutoCAD, and then I have the 2 that I just generated. All right. Okay. Over here, we're not going to worry about this just yet, but I do have my multi-line text tool selected, and I also have down here a single line text tool. All right. Now, before we get to actually creating some text, I'm going to skip ahead. I want to skip ahead and show you what happens when we use this text. All right. So I acted like I was going to create some text, and AutoCAD said, hey, I recognize that you've just created some annotative text. What scale would you like to set your model space to accommodate that text? And I am going to say, I'm going to set my model space to whatever scale my drawings will be that are going to be printed. All right. This is also a confusing topic. I just created some text. One was a 1/4 inch tall, one was an 1/8 inch tall, right? Those stand alone. Regardless of what scale they're going to be printed at, they need to be an 1/8 inch tall or a 1/4 inch tall. Okay, separate topic. What scale is my final drawing going to be at? Right? AutoCAD needs to know that. So it knows your text height, it needs to be this tall. That's great. What scale do you want to print it at? So that when you put text in here, I know how big to make it so that it's appropriate. Okay, so AutoCAD recognizes that immediately. I'm going to say 1/4 of an inch. I don't quite know yet what my scale is going to be, but I'm going to guess 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, what you may not have noticed is that down here, you see my annotative scale changed to 1/4 of an inch down here. It used to be 1:1. And by setting that to 1/4 of an inch there, it's set it here. All right? Okay. Yep.
So if that, for whatever reason, maybe because mine didn't come up.
Yeah.
So if that one doesn't come up, if you just go down and make sure the scale is where you need it to be, that works the same way?
Yep, exactly. Yes. So, sorry, this is kind of it's a long process, and I think it'll take us getting through text and dimensions to fully understand the annotative process, but once you have it, it's pretty easy, right? But it'll take a little bit of time. Because, again, just like everything in AutoCAD, it's not difficult, but there's a lot of steps involved, right? And there's a lot of things that you kind of have to remember, and when you're new at it, you don't always remember all those things. All right. So I've created my annotative text style, and I've told AutoCAD how large that text needs to be when it prints. Then I've gone into model space and I've said, okay, you know, the text style is set. My final drawing will be printed at this scale. And so you, AutoCAD, need to size my text up and down so that when it prints, it's the right size. Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check this little lightning bolt here. I'm going to click on it, and I'll tell you why in a minute, okay? So we have this Show Annotative Objects selected, and we also have this little Add Scales to Annotative Objects. We're going to leave those two checked, okay? If you don't have this little toolbar on the bottom of your screen, come over here to Customize, and this one is Annotation Scale right there. I believe that's the one. So if you don't see that, turn your annotation scale on there. All right. And here we go. We're going to create some annotative text, okay? Now, I'm going to show you how to create two different types of text types in model space. And then without you actually knowing how to print from paper space quite yet, I'm going to go to paper space and show you that they are working in paper space. They're going to print the right size, okay? So this lecture is almost two-part. We have this portion of it where we learn how to create text, and then the second portion of it where we learn how to use paper space so that we can then see that the text is generating the right size, all right? So I am going to create our first type of text, which is single line text. And here is the icon. We can initiate the command on the ribbon here. And I can also, if I want to initiate single line text at the command line, I can just type T-E-X-T, enter. Okay, doing that is the same thing as clicking on single line text up here. And I have some settings that need to be addressed. I have justify and I have style, all right? So the style portion of this, I can click here and choose the style I want to use. But if I have a style selected up here in my text style selector, then that sort of overrides that, right? It's already set. So if this drop down is showing the text style that I want to use, then I don't need to worry about setting my text style down here, all right? But I do need to worry within single line text about my justification. So if I click on justify, I get a bunch of different options. I get left, center, right, align, middle, fit, and then I have a bunch of abbreviations. And these are top left, top center, top right, middle left, middle center, middle right, bottom left, bottom center, bottom right. Let's see if we can Google those and they'll all show up. Let's see. See if we can get a good abbreviation from all of those. Oh, Revit. Not Revit, AutoCAD. Sorry. I very literally have recorded 50 videos for Revit this week, so Revit's on my mind. All right, so let's see if we can get all the abbreviations in here. Yeah, there we go. So if you Google the single line text abbreviations, all the justifications, they'll pop up here, but they're really fairly simple. Once you do them once or twice, you'll very evidently be able to see what they're all about. So top left, top center, top right, middle left, middle center, middle right, bottom left, bottom center, bottom right. All right, so I'm going to pick a justification, and then I'm going to create a single line of text. Single line text is meant to be typed not in paragraph format. Okay, so it's meant to be like just a very short piece of text that's descriptive, but it's not meant to be like a text block, right? So if you look over here on these drawings, like over here on the wall, you can see that we have like these general note areas, right, where you have these long paragraphs of text that are typed in. Those are going to be multi-line text. And then things like just a little bit of descriptive text, like, and you guys can't see it, but it says section corner monument as noted, or street monument to be set. Just a little string of text, that's going to be a single line piece of text. Okay, so we have paragraph type formats of text, and then we have single line, just little bits of text for description. Okay, if you wanted to add like a room name or something like that, a single line text would be good for that. So I'm going to pick my justification, and so I'm going to pick top center TC. I can click on it, or I could type TC and hit enter. So click, and I'm going to specify the top center point of the text. Okay, so maybe that's, you know, the midpoint here. I'm going to click. Now it says rotation angle, specify the rotation angle of the text. So if you want it to be 45 degrees or whatever, you could do that, right? I very rarely use that. If I want to rotate my text, I'll create it so it's kind of at a 0 angle, and then I'll rotate it using the rotate command. So I'm going to hit enter again, and immediately AutoCAD says, okay, great, type your text. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can hit enter, and I can wrap. So my text will wrap, and I could enter another line of text if I wanted, right? So single line text is a bit misleading. You can have multiple lines, but it's not meant to, you know, word process. So 5, 6, struggling tonight. 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. Yep.
For some reason my text is huge.
Yes, it probably will be.
Like, I'm not sure why, because I've checked.
I'll talk about it. Let me talk about it. Yep.
So I was following along when you made your quarter caliber, you tried to make mine as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that my annotation text I set a quarter inch, or yours is set at 3/16. Why is that? I thought I did the same steps you did, but if you look.
Oh, this right here?
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. So we did, if I look at my text style again, it'll be set to the right height. It will be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why they were different.
I
thought I did the same. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't know, something.
Okay.
That is good. If you open a brand new drawing, and they should be identical. Maybe my precision is set not as high as yours or something, where it's, you know, that could be it.
Mine's still at like 136.
That might be it. That could be it. Okay, so I've hit return, and I've entered a second line of text, right? If I want to come out of this text, I can hit enter twice, and it finishes the text. I could also click somewhere in space, and let me show you what happens when I do that. I'm going to hit text. Okay. Okay, click. And if I were to type some more, enter, and I wanted to exit, I could hit enter twice. But if I clicked over here, my single line text jumps, right? So this is a great tool when I want to add rooms to a floor plan, because I could type a room number and then jump over here, type a room number, jump over here, type a room number, jump over here, right? And I can click out of, oh, I can't click out of it anymore. It used to let us do that. I'm going to have to enter twice, and it's finished, okay? Now, Emma's like, hey, wait a minute, my text looks really, really large, right? So this text is really large, even though this Calibri text is supposed to be 1/4 of an inch tall, right? And if I look at this Calibri text, let me remind you of a little command called the list, li enter, where I click on a command, I hit enter, and let's get my command line is too short. There we go. my command line here will show me if I list something, information about that object. Oh, there it is. Like usually a window pops up, and it did. It was just on my other screen. It was hiding out. You guys probably got the screen happening. There we go. So in actuality, this text that I created is a foot tall, and that's because when I scale it down, it's going to scale it down perfectly so that it's readable at 1/4 of an inch when it prints. So if you look at yours, Emma, did you do this list? Did it say how tall it was?
1 second. Because I deleted the text trying
Okay.
to figure it out.
Okay. So if you had, but here's the other thing, right? So I'm going to do a quick layout with all of you not quite knowing how to use paper space here. I'm going to set my scale to 1/4 of an inch. And if I dist distance, right? It says 3/16, but it's going to round, right? If I click on the exact right spot, which is probably a tiny bit below it, it'll be 1/4 of an inch, right? So on my page, it prints at 1/4 of an inch, but in model space, it's actually a foot tall, all right? Now, the great thing about this is that this text is set to be 1/4 of an inch printed regardless of what the scale of my drawing is. So if I want to change my annotation scale here to 1/8 of an inch, it jumps twice the size, right? Because my scale factor at 1/8 of an inch is double what it is at 1/4 of an inch, right? 1/4 of an inch, the scale factor is 48, so we're zooming in 48 times to scale it. And for 1/8 of an inch, we're zooming in 96 times. So that makes sense. So this text right here, if I list it, it's a little freaky when that happens, right? Don't panic. If I list it, you'll see that it is 2 feet tall now. All right. And if I change the scale again from 1/8 of an inch to 1/16, it even doubles again, right? So here, Marty, you were like, this is what I was anticipating happening, right? It gets really, really big. So if you're changing scales, right, and you've already set, you've drawn these beautiful drawings and you set your scale, then you create your text, and you've lined your text up with, everything in the drawing, and then somebody says, hey, make the, change the scale to 1/8 inch, let's make the drawing smaller, and you're like, well, just hold on there. That's a lot of work for me, right? You still have to alter things even though the text is taking care of itself. So I'm going to change this now back down to 1/8 and then back down to 1/4. And if we go down to 1/2 inch, which is half the scale factor of 1/4, the text gets even smaller, right? So the system really works. It's not that it's any less work if you change the scale or you have to kind of place your text around items in your floor plans or whatever you're drawing, right? But you don't have to think about that making your text bigger to then scale it down to make it correct, all right? So now if I go over to my paper space, I can see that my text looks the right size, okay? Any questions so far on the text? Okay, yep.
I guess my question would be, so usually you want to do the drawing before the text, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would you want to do the text at the same scale as the drawing and then adjust it from there? That way it's placed where you want it to
Yes.
be, where it should be, and then,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying is I have to think ahead, right? So you have to know that you are drawing the drawing, and then you have to be thinking ahead, what scale am I going to print this drawing at, right? And you have to maybe figure that out, because the second you start putting text in there and lining it up or trying to not have it, interfere with all your building elements on your drawings, the second that you change the scale or alter it or whatever in the end, you're going to have a lot of work realigning things, right? And so you have to start thinking about what scale this is going to be printed at as you're drawing it, essentially, which isn't a big deal, right? My workflow, honestly, those of you that are maybe kind of working in industry or, somewhat in similar industry, clients stop in all the time. Hey, I was just having lunch with somebody over here and I just thought I'd come in and see how the drawings are going. And can you print me a set real quick, right? And so clients come in unexpectedly all the time. So my workflow is that when I start a drawing, I kind of get a basis for how big the drawing is going to be, and I immediately set up my sheets so that I can print them. So if somebody comes in or I get a call and somebody needs a set of drawings, they're already ready to print, so I don't have to spend 45 minutes getting it set up to send to somebody, right? So you are going to be thinking about it in the beginning. All right, so let's use our other text style to create some text as well. I'm going to change my text over here to my 1/8" city blueprint, right? The love-hate relationship with city blueprint. And everybody thinks city blueprint's the architectural, right, font. If you guys aren't into fonts yet, you will be, especially the architecture students. And I'm going to generate this time some single line text. Yep.
Underneath the 1/8", so this is city blueprint, yeah, and then you go down to 3/16. So I try to adjust mine to 3/16.
Don't worry about this. Just go through the text style will control. So it will change and it will control and be the right size if you just generate it according to the text style. It'll be okay. Yep. All right, so let's create some more text, but let's do it with multi-line text so you can see what that looks like, okay? I have my single line text tool here, and if I drop down, I can change to multi-line text. And multi-line text functions a lot more like a word processing type software, okay? Where you are trying to generate something that fits within a text box. So I'm going to click to initiate my multi-line text, and I'm going to drag this out to be whatever size I want it to be, okay? And I could click down here on width and make it a specific width if I wanted to, but usually I don't quite know what width I want it to be. Sometimes I do. So usually I'll just kind of click a text box and start typing, and then when I'm done with my text, I'll kind of fit it to wherever it needs to go on the page. Okay, but this looks like, somewhat like a word processor. Something different that we have happening in the ribbon that we didn't see happening in single line text is that we have a lot of text editing type information here, right? So we can make it bold or italicized or strike it or change the layer or the justification or whatever type of things we want to do, okay? You see here it updated. See how I started the style and it updated. And I also have a close editor, so I can come in here and I can, number one. Oop, there we go. And I'm going to type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then, I can type a bunch of stuff and enter. And then if I don't want to have a number, right, this is going to function just like Word does. I can just continue to hit enter. Or if I want to give myself a real headache, let's just press one letter. Maybe this seems to go quicker, right? But it gets to the end there. Ooh, look. Okay. And we'll be able to bring it in and it will eventually wrap, but it will wrap in paragraph format, okay? So this appears, I'm going to click Close Text Editor, and I can grab this and I can drag it in. Ooh, no, it's not wanting to go. Oh, you know why? I think because there's no spaces. There we go. It was acting like one gigantic word. I was thinking it should be wrapping there. But it will wrap, if you are typing normally. Yep.
I missed, how did you close the text? Oh, okay.
This little guy right there. Yep. So I click on Close Text Editor, okay? I can come back in. I can edit this piece of text by double clicking on it. Click, click. And my text editor pops back up. And just like in Word, right, or any other word processing software, I can select all of the text and I can change the justification, right? I can click on these buttons and you can dynamically see that it starts centering and going middle right, bottom left, all that good stuff, right? You can add columns or symbols or, whatever, bullets and numbering, line spacing. You can change anything that you want with regard to this text. So I'm just going to do, yep.
After you leave the text box, can you go back and make the changes after?
Yeah. So once I have exited the text here, and this goes for single line text as well, if I double click on it, click, click, I can enter back into that text editor. Is that what you're asking?
Oh, yes. All right. For
Yep.
some reason, what I was doing before, I guess I was directly on it.
You guys ever seen that? There's a really, everybody watches Modern Family. You guys seen the double click on Modern Family?
I haven't seen it.
You guys haven't seen that? Okay, you guys have to YouTube it then when you get home. Where the the teenage son is trying to show the dad how to double click, and he can't make it happen. He's like, double click, and he does it really slow, like click, click. It's like, no, you have to click, click really fast, right? That's what I was doing. Click, click. It's really funny. Anyway, yeah, so you're going to double click on it and it will pop you back into the editor. Click, click, right? And you can get back out of it. And you can also double click on the single line text as well. Click, click, and it pops right back up. Okay, what you're seeing, and I hit escape to get out of that, what you're seeing when you select this is kind of a hint at all of the different annotative scales that could be happening, right, in your model space. So if this starts happening, you're seeing stuff like this, it's because you're getting a preview of the different text heights should you choose to change your model space to a different annotative scale, right? There's nothing wrong here. If I hit escape, then it goes away, but you're just getting a preview for what could happen. This one is not doing it, but that one is. Likely because this one, the annotative scale for model space hasn't changed yet. I bet now, yeah, see now when I click on it, that annotative scale has been added to that piece of text, so I'm getting a preview of the other one. Anyway. All right, so we have our single line text and then we have our multi-line text, okay? So now if I go back into paper space, I'm gonna double click and I'm gonna move my little view over here, right? And, well, actually, let's get a good view of both of them together. This text was actually set to be 1/8 of an inch tall printed, and this was set to be 1/4 of an inch printed, and you can see that happening, right? So that's one really nice thing about annotative text. Everything remains very consistent. And I think I've made a good point of how cumbersome this can be before this annotative text came into play, right? But this has made everything so nice, and everything is really consistent. There's no mistakes in how tall things need to be. Just makes a lot of sense in AutoCAD. All right, so one thing a couple of other annotative type settings I want to show you, and then I'm going to show you a few things on your assignment that you'll be doing. I said before that you needed to have this little lightning bolt right here selected, okay? And basically what this little lightning bolt does is when you change this annotation scale of your model space, it will automatically add that scale to your text, okay? And that is pretty important because otherwise you would have to manually go in and add the annotation scale to your text, right? Adding another level of complexity. So if I didn't have this little lightning bolt selected, okay, to be able to view this at the 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot height, I would have to click on the text and right click, and I could choose annotative object scale, add current scale. There's the manual add current scale. Or I could choose add delete scales, and the scales that are associated with that text appear here, okay? So this process right here of right-clicking and going into adding annotative scales, that is sort of done away with by clicking on this little lightning bolt. It does it automatically. So as I change my scales back and forth here, they're automatically added to these pieces so that when you scale them, they flex automatically instead of you having to assign it manually. A lot of explanation.
What makes I want to keep calling it like the ghost text. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. It's the annotation scales that have been added to those objects. You're viewing them. Yep. Exactly. All right. So let's look at, I'm going to go over here and you know what? I'm really tempted. So this is your assignment. Let me step back. I don't want to do this quite yet. I'm going to go back into my drawing here. I want to give you a little bit, I think we're moving along pretty well. Does everybody kind of understand what's happening with the text? Somewhat, right? It's a lot better than it used to be, but it's still a little cumbersome. But I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to paper space maybe so that you can see that your text is functioning, because that's really kind of the test of your text, is that if you can view it in model space and it's the right height, then you know that you're doing it correctly, right? So I'm going to flip over here to layout. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how paper space is going to work, and then we'll talk about it next time, okay, in depth. But these layout tabs down here, these are paper space. And I've given you somewhat of a preview of them, right? I'm not going to show you how to change the page size or do anything like that, but what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you how to draw a viewport and how to scale the viewport so that you can view your objects, okay? But essentially, probably the best way to describe paper space.
I don't think I'm doing the text right because I'm not seeing anything.
Your annotation scale hasn't been added. Well, hold on just one second. Let me show you, I need to show you guys something else too. Somebody's taken my table of paper over there. Here it is. All right. Probably the best way. Oh, this is terrible. The best way of thinking about paper space is thinking about two pieces of paper laying on top of each other, right? And this would be model space back here. This is where all of our drawings are. And this is paper space. And paper space lays over the top of model space just like this, okay? And so the idea is that we view our drawings in model space. There will be drawings on this page. And paper space is over the top of it. And then what we're going to do with paper space, so we're going to tear a hole in it. Not a very accurate hole. But we're going to use a viewport to cut a hole in our paper space to then be able to view our drawings in model space, right? So we have model space with drawings, paper space. Paper space is laying over the top of model space. We cut a hole in our paper space to view our drawings in model space, okay? So it's a pretty easy way to think about how paper space and model space function with one another, right? Because here's my model space back here, and this is where all of my drawings are situated, right? And then I switch into my models or my paper space layout tab here by clicking on it. I've got a piece of paper, and I have a viewport here, and the viewport essentially functions as the cutting of the hole, right? So the viewport cuts a hole in my piece of paper so that I can then view my drawings behind it, okay? So that's how this system works. So let me show you how to generate a viewport so that you can view your drawings behind there, okay? I'm gonna hit delete, and if you hit delete on that viewport, select it and hit delete, it goes away, obviously. But essentially, you know, I've said it before, but the viewport is the hole in paper space so you can view model space. To create a viewport, a simple shortcut is MV, make view on the keyboard, MV, enter, click, click, and it cuts a hole in that paper space. Okay, so let me undo that. MV, make view, enter, click, click, and I just created a viewport. Okay, now viewports are highly editable, and this looks like, you know, any other piece of geometry in AutoCAD. It looks like a rectangle, right? Did you have a question?
I was asking, it appears that when you make the viewport, it automatically scales your entire drawing to fit in that viewport.
It does. Yes, it does. But to what scale, right? That's the important question. We'll talk about that. But yes, it does. And viewports are special. They look like another piece of geometry, right? So this looks like a rectangle. It looks like I drew it on a red layer. But it has other functionality associated with it. So it cuts a hole in paper space to view model space, but then I can scale the viewport so that my drawing is viewed at a scaled proportion. Okay, so if I click on my viewport and I come down here, okay, I've got my scale of selected viewport down here, and right now it essentially has chosen scale to fit. So basically AutoCAD didn't really care what scale the drawings were at as long as you could see them through the viewport. So it's our job to click on this down arrow while our viewport is selected and to change the scale. So if I change this to 1/4 of an inch, then it will scale it to 1/4 of an inch, right? Super easy. If I change it to 1/8 of an inch, it scales to 1/8 of an inch, okay? Now, don't be afraid. Scaling it really is as easy as it looks, right? And I mean that when I scale a viewport, if I decide I don't like the scale and I want to scale it again, I'm not scaling a scaled object, right? So I can scale these back and forth and change them 50 times in the process of a project, and every time they sort of reset and take the scale from an original size, right? So if you think, well, I've already scaled it to 1/4 of an inch, so if I scale it to 1/2, the drawing's already scaled, so I'm going to scale a scale drawing, and then it's going to be off increment, right? It's not the case, okay? Every time you rescale something, it resets from point 0. So you can scale these back and forth through the viewport as many times as you want to get them the right size. So I grab my viewport while it's selected. I come down here, drop down, or drop up, I guess, in this case, and I change the scale, 1/4 of an inch, okay? Emma, is your text showing up now in your viewport?
Mm-mm.
It's not? Okay, so I'm wondering if you don't have this little lightning bolt turned on.
I do.
Is your annotation scale set here?
Yes.
Okay, let me come look at that in a second then. Something else is
Okay.
going on with
I'm
yours
still
then.
following along.
So sometimes, I was going to say sometimes, if you don't have this lightning bolt on, and let's say I have my paper space set to 1/4 of an inch, right? And I go back into model space, and this text is only set to be viewed at an 1/8 inch scale, and it's not assigned the 1/4 inch scale, then that object will be filtered out of a viewport. So if you have things maybe not showing up in viewports, it might be because the current annotation scale isn't associated with it, and it's being filtered out of the viewport. But I think if you are to keep this turned on, then things should, and I say should because things don't always work out in AutoCAD, but things should be okay, all right? I'm going to go back into paper space. Another thing I want to point out is if you double click in your viewport, click, essentially you're engaging model space, all right? So I can pan back and forth, and I can zoom in and out. So I can essentially center or capture the view that I want within my viewport and then scale it. I double click in the viewport to engage it. I double click out to disengage. So click, and I'm out of it. And the difference is if I'm engaged, model space is moving, and if I disengage, click, then paper space is moving here. Okay. If you happen to get stuck and you can't get out, just type PS, paper space, enter at the command line, and you'll get out of paper space as well. Okay. So without getting into a huge amount of explanation on paper space, this is just a good way to be able to test your text styles, right? Make sure that things are happening the way they should. You saw when I was trying to illustrate how text was scaling up and down, I would measure it in paper space, right? So just in pure paper space, I could type distance, D-I-S-T, and I could somewhat get maybe an approximation of how tall that needed to be, and it would tell me if I was doing things correctly or not. Okay. All right. Any other questions so far? Except we'll come look at yours in a minute. Okay. All right. So we do have an assignment. That actually went pretty quick. Sometimes it's hit or miss with some classes. Sometimes annotative text will take like 2.5 hours. It's just sometimes we just breeze through it, which is good. Let's look at the assignment. This assignment is going to be all about text justification. And so these outlines, this outline and this outline, have been given to you. They're on the CAD Common. So if you want to go and grab them off of the CAD Common, these are kind of the starting points for your next assignment. And essentially, you're going to fill them out to be identical to the project manual here. So let me just browse up and find that. Let's see. Okay. We'll do a few of these. Oh, I think it's down in the assignment portion, isn't it? Bless you. Okay, so here is that first one, right? This little guy here, and then here is the second one. And essentially the instructions are basically within the assignment here. So this one says you want to regenerate this text here, and you want it to be Arial style. And hold on, the instructions for this first one are above it. So copy the text style.dwg from the CAD Common, create a text style in your drawing called Arial 8, and you want your height, you want it to be. Now let me just say this, we're going to do annotative text. So I'm going to make a note of this in the assignment. So when it says box unchecked, don't do that, okay? Make sure you're using annotative text and that you are setting your height, you know, it's 1/8 inch within the text style. So this one will be Arial 8, and the font will be Arial, the text height will be 1/8 of an inch, the width factor will be 8.8. The oblique factor will be 0, and it will not be backwards. And then you're just going to fill out these pages with this text style generated and with the appropriate height, okay? And the appropriate justification. So let me just, one thing I kind of breezed over a little bit in single line text was the justification, right? So I told you what these justifications were, but I just want to show you, I won't show you them all, but we'll do a few within the assignment just to make it clear what they're doing. So if I want my text to align with the bottom left here, right, then the justification that I'm going to choose for my text will be BL, bottom left. Click. And so I would click there, bottom left. Hold on, let's see. This is my, I haven't set, sorry, I was trying to shortcut. I haven't set up an annotative text style. So let's do this. We'll make this annotative, and I'm just guessing these are not the actual assignment heights. Set current. Okay, this is going to be 1:1. Okay. Text, justify, bottom left, click, bottom left, click, enter, and whatever that was, right? Enter, enter. And I want this to be bottom left here as well. So text, enter, justify, I could go down and click on justify, or I could type J, enter, right? You're gonna get really quick at these really fast. BL, bottom left, enter, specify the bottom left corner, click, enter, and okay, and text, enter, justify, J, enter, BL, bottom left, enter, click, enter, uh-oh, I don't know the zip code, 103, we'll guess. Here we go. Now,
Is that one of those things that you could shortcut by space baring?
yep, yes, yep, exactly. So good reminder, right? The space bar is enter in AutoCAD. So I'm hitting TEXT space bar, J space bar, you know, BL space bar, and then I'm typing out. Yep. So this one, if I wanted to change the text style, I would come into my text style editor. I would click on new, and we'll make this one Romans S, and Roman, we'll choose that one. It's bad font, bad font. It's terrible looking, right? 1/4 of an inch tall. We'll make the width factor 0.80, right? I'm just making this up just to show you, but I'm going to click apply, set current, and close it out. So for the second portion of the assignment, you'll create a brand new text style and you'll regenerate some text. So TEXT, enter, and you'll notice for this assignment, I'm doing single line text, of course, right? It kind of makes sense because it's just, I'm justifying to a point, justifying to a point, justifying to a point, which is easier with single line text as opposed to trying to line a paragraph up with those lines exactly, right? So justify, bottom left, click, enter, and enter, enter, space bar, right? Justify, J, enter, BL, enter, click, enter, 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 and then space bar, J, enter, BL, enter, enter. Okay, so I was able to create, you know, this was style number 1, style number 2, and then style number 3, of course. And you would use a single line text and bottom left justify it. Okay, yep.
So I just tried to create one of these things, and the paper, you do annotative check, and then the paper text height is what he's saying height is 1/8, right? So I put 1/8 in there, but it keeps changing it to 1/4.
What is your precision set to?
I have no idea.
Units. It's
I just did whatever I'm in the file, whatever he has.
so I think what's happening though is your precision isn't set fine enough, and so it's jumping to the next increment. Is your precision set to like 1/4 of an inch maybe?
Whatever this file is. Let's see, what is it?
I don't remember if I changed it or not. I may or
No,
may.
it's not. It's set 1/4. So we have to change the precision of the document to be able to do it.
Tricky.
So look at him.
We'll blame it on Jeff. I know. There you go, right? I very clearly remember doing these things when I was learning AutoCAD and thinking, how do you ever remember all these things, right? All these errors. And, you know, I can figure most things out because I have been stuck on most things, you know, by myself for hours at a time at midnight. So, you know, you start to troubleshoot real quick. Okay. Now this drawing right here is 8.5 by 11, right? So if you think about it, we're printing this from model space because you guys don't know how to print from paper space yet, right? So if you think about this, this is 8.5 by 11. It is the exact same size as an actual piece of paper. So when you print these out, the scale is going to be 1:1 because you're not scaling it up or down. It's the actual size of the piece of paper when you print. So your annotative scale, your scale will be 1:1 here, right? And in this text justification one, same thing. When you print this one out, you're not going to have to change your annotative scale because it's going to be printed out 1:1, right? You're going to create a PDF and it's going to be printed actual size, right? It's an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. Now this one is a little bit more tricky. You're going to use a combination of, this is multi-line text here, right? And you're going to copy this just as identical as you can see it on this page. So you're going to type all of this text into this box here, and then you're going to use your single line text to justify bottom left here, type default, bottom center, bottom right, and you have all of the different justifications here that you're going to have to worry about. With these, you're going to have to create 1, 2, 3, 4 different text styles, because this one will have a 0.6 width factor, a 0.7, a 0.8, a 0.9, right? And all of these are going to have different oblique angles, so you're going to have to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more of these with all of these different properties associated with them in the text style. And then you're going to create these 3 pieces of text, and you're just going to really copy them, essentially. So it's a pretty good exercise, right? This text is 3/32 inch. If it says D text, that is kind of an old term for single line text, right? That was, I know, it throws everybody off. It used to be called D text, or you would edit single line text with the command DD edit, right? So it's single line text. This one is an align justification. Let me show you what that one throws everybody off until they do it, and then they are always like, oh, that was super easy. I'm going to do a text justify, enter, and you'll notice we have an align fit here. So if I click on align, it says specify the first endpoint. Click. The second base point. Click. And it aligned it, right? So the idea is to say, I want my text to go from here to there. I don't care how big it is, scale it up so that it fits there, okay? So you're probably going to have 10 or 15 different text styles that you have to generate to do this assignment. And the idea is to make this page look identical in AutoCAD, essentially. Yep. Backwards text. So within your text style, you have a backwards option. I have never used backwards text, but maybe somebody out there will want to use backwards text.
It does look like
It's the oblique angle.
Yeah.
So you'll have to italicize it. So if you have an oblique angle specified as 20 degrees, you're going to type in 20 there, and it will give it a 20-degree angle. Yeah. Okay. I haven't posted the assignment yet, but let me do that. And these two files that you're going to start your assignment with are in that file, the assignment file, so you can download them there. But these are also on CAD Common. It's the text justification and text style files. So you can grab those if you want as well. Any other questions?
Yeah, the last week when you went to the one-to-one,
One-to-one.
where did that, what we were doing, the quarter inch, eighth inch, and all of a sudden you're on one-to-one? What's that?
With the precision.
Well, I think what you're asking is, you're like, well, why is it one-to-one, right?
All of a sudden you went to one-to-one.
Right.
First you were doing all this quarter inch to one,
Yeah.
to 1 foot, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing one-to-one. Well, when did you change that? I guess I'll see it on video.
So this one was actually, I didn't change this one. When I opened this drawing up, it was set to one-to-one. And the reason it is going to be one-to-one is because when you are drawing drawings that are much larger than a physical piece of paper, you have to scale them down by 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot, or 1/8 inch is equal to a foot. So they'll be small enough to fit on the physical print. But when this thing right here is actually, this is the same size as a physical piece of paper, right? So we don't have to scale it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. It's a tricky one. Let me take attendance here real quick. I'm gonna give you guys all some points here for everybody being here. But I'm gonna stop the video here real quick.